Last week, I announced that we had hired Margaret Eichmann to be our new membership director for the club. Margaret is here with us today, and I just wanted to point her out. She's there in the back of the room. Please feel free to call Margaret if you have questions about club membership or activities in the club. I do have a few announcements, as always. Our next Friday's forum is Gambling in Oregon, Economic Tonic, Fiscal Band-Aid, or SOAR on the Body Politic. Our speakers will include Representative Mark Haas, David Leslie of Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon, and Robert Whalen, Senior Economist with Eco Northwest, and it'll be moderated by board member Chip Lazenby. A reminder, as we say on our website, City Club is not just lunch. We have a number of other events that you might be interested coming up. In November, our Citizens Read book group is reading Culture Wars, The Myth of a Polarized America by Morris Fiorna, Samuel Abrams, and Jeremy Pope. The group will meet at 7 p.m. Monday, November 28th at City Club Commons, 9th in Washington. That's free and open to the public. Copies of the book are available at the back table for purchase. 2 issue committee meetings I want to highlight for you. On Wednesday, November 9th, our Arts and Culture Committee meets on discussing the role of dance in Portland's creative economy with guest panelists Linda Johnson and Christopher Stonewell of the Oregon Ballet Theater. And then on November 14th, Acting Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Economic Development Sandy Baruja, who's a native of Portland and a former City Club member, will address our Business Issue Committee about the President's proposed Strengthening America's Community Initiative. All of our issue committee meetings are open to the public and are a great way for our many new City Club members to get active in the club. As always, details on these events and more can be found on the club's website and in our bulletin. Our sponsors this quarter are McEwen Gisvold LLP and Medico Support Services of the Northwest Incorporated. They make broadcast of the City Club possible, so would you please join me in thanking our sponsors. To today's program. It's been almost 20 years since then Portland Mayor Bud Clark introduced a 12-point plan to break the cycle of homelessness. It was an ambitious, service-oriented approach to addressing homelessness in Portland. Here it is now 2005, and the city has initiated a new 10-year plan to end homelessness. Portland Mercury this week noted the irony that at the same time, Mayor Potter has begun a crackdown on panhandling and established a curfew on the South Park blocks. So how has the face of homelessness and our approach to the problem changed? Why do some think the outcomes will be different this time? Our guests today are 3 community leaders who influence local policy. Our panel will be moderated by Gretchen Kafoury, who will introduce our speakers. Gretchen, of course, has been a state representative from Portland, a Multnomah County commissioner, and from 1991 to 1998, a Portland City Council member. In each of those roles, Gretchen made affordable and safe housing a priority issue. She's now an instructor at the Hatfield School of Government at Portland State, and I'll turn the program over to her. Gretchen?
He didn't give me a little box to stand on, so. It's a real delight to come back to the City Club on this end of the microphone again. As Doug mentioned, my new role is an academic, and I consider myself a facilitator much more than a politician these days, but I guess you never get too far from your roots. It certainly doesn't mean I'm any less passionate about the issue of homelessness than I was 30 years ago. I have been involved in many of the responses since the early 80s and recently served on Erik and Serena's 10-year plan to end homelessness committee. I also teach a class on homelessness and poverty, and I am chair of the Oregon Center for Public Policy, which advocates for low-income people. So that gives you my credentials for moderating today. In the early 1980s, Portland wasn't asleep as our population began to grow and change of homeless people. We knew something was happening. We just didn't know exactly what it was. We saw a change in the faces of homelessness, Many more Vietnam veterans were present, and of course, the major policy shift of the 1970s was deinstitutionalization of the mentally ill, and we began to see a huge increase of mentally ill people as community services were not picked up to replace the state hospital. Without getting too political today, 1980 was a critical year, a turning point, in fact, in the history. Ronald Reagan was elected, and thus began the revolution in government that continues to influence how we respond to some of these deep social issues today. I cannot understate this point. During the next 8 years, federal funds for housing would drop by 75%. Social services like health and mental health would be block granted to the states and cut severely. And the safety net would, in fact, be transferred to state and local governments. Oregon had its own deep recession in the 1980s, but we kept trying to meet the needs of those at the very bottom of the economic ladder. 1983 and 84 actually were the first community-wide looks that United Way started in coordinating the Emergency Basic Needs Committee, trying to make sure that every citizen had access to at least emergency food and shelter. 1988 and 89, as Doug mentioned, Mayor Bud Clark produced a 12-point plan, and also at that same period of time, Housing Authority Director Don Clark produced a report called Resolving Homelessness, a report and planning framework. Well, obviously, we didn't get that work done. The fact remains that we still have homeless people. The boom years of the 1990s did not lift all boats. We now see many more families in poverty. I believe it's a deep disgrace in our communities. Until Katrina, the federal government continued in denial about race and poverty in America. Locally, we still have no dedicated source for funding affordable housing, and when Multnomah County is pressured, it's to provide jail beds, not services for homeless people. The purpose today is to show, as I did in a speech here 10 years ago, that Portland has a deep tradition of cooperation between the public and private sectors, and that there are things that can be done. Remember, as public health planners often state, the public policy decisions we make today will determine the outcome of public reality in the future. Our panel today is an excellent cross-section of the different factors that influence how we deal with homelessness in Portland. Erik Sten, City Commissioner Erik Sten, is a homegrown treasure. He was educated in Portland Public Schools and got his formal education at Stanford. He immediately came back to town and began work for myself. First, he was just a staff assistant, but within 2 years, he became my executive assistant because of his skills and intelligence, and good nature, I should add. He was elected with his own youthful creative campaign in 1996. He continues to advocate for housing, as well as steering the recent city attempts to purchase PGE Enron. In his 15-year career of public service, he has led bureaus as diverse as fire and emergency services, water, cable, and the arts. He has a particular interest in global warming and sustainable energy policy. And his role today, he recently led the 10-year plan to end homelessness effort. Genevieve Nelson is another local treasure. She co-founded Sisters of the Road and has been a community organizer in Old Town Chinatown since 1972. She reminds us that homelessness has always been with us. We used to call her area of town Skid Row. but her unique perspective is a lifelong dedication to practicing nonviolence and what she calls gentle personalism. She used this philosophy to personally interview 600 men and women and has formed the Crossroads Leadership Team for people with the experience of homelessness to create and implement policy and programs designed to liberate them from a lifetime of charity. Our final panelist is Lisa Schroeder. She is what some of us might fondly call a foodie. You don't get it? The restaurant business? Oh, well, I tried. She currently runs 3 restaurants in Portland. Mother's Bistro and Bar was her original success. She has gone on to found Mamma Mia Trattoria and Balabusta. I hope I said that right. She honed her skills in France, but takes great pride in the fact that she has created restaurants that serve the food we want to eat, mother food, as she calls it. All this may seem distant to the topic at hand, but she currently serves as co-chair of the Downtown Retail Council and joins this panel not to represent, but to discuss her personal experiences with homeless people. Each panelist will give a 5-minute reflection from their perspective. Then I will ask a few questions, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. So our order today will be Ginny, Lisa, and Erik. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I was asked to give the audience a picture of people who are dealing with homelessness and have dealt with homelessness and what the changes look like over the last 20 years. But I've been around longer than that, so I'm going to give it to you for the last 33. In 1972, the Old Town Chinatown neighborhood was affectionately called by its residents the Avenue, the Burnside community, or the Burnside neighborhood. 2,000 people, mostly men, lived there. The cost of living was not greater than a veteran's pension or a Social Security check. You could get a room in an old hotel for $1.25 a night, or not more than $40 per month. This affordable housing was available to tenants who were addicted and actively using, and those who weren't. Case management was not a requirement for a room. There were at least a half a dozen cheap eateries in addition to the missions and the soup lines. A person with limited income could exercise choice in where they wanted to live and what they wanted to eat, meager as that may have been. All those residents who called the Avenue home knew that Burnside, the neighborhood's southern boundary, was a line of demarcation. Everything to the north of it was Skid Row, and almost everyone to the south of it was uncaring and, worse, afraid of them. By the beginning of the 1980s, the Burnside neighborhood was in the throes of losing low-income hotels to urban gentrification. The writing had been on the wall for years. Many elderly pensioners, men who had done manual labor all of their lives and had never shirked from responsibility, knew they were being forced out of the only homes they could afford to make way for fancy boutiques and upscale restaurants. Minimum wage was no longer keeping up with the cost of living. Rent skyrocketed in Portland. The number of people living on the street increased. As a society, we officially coined them the homeless. In the mid-'80s, men and women dealing with the calamities of poverty and homelessness began to exclaim in Sisters of the Road Cafe and other community gathering spots, "We are treated like cattle. We are not even considered human by housed people." A little girl I worked with at the West Women and Children's Shelter told me, "Jenny, when you go out and talk to people about us, tell them not to call me the homeless. Tell them to please call me by my name. I knew then, as a society, we would reap a whirlwind in these children's adulthood if we failed to pay attention to them now. And as a sidebar, a number of those young folks who were 3 and 5 and 10 and 12 in the West Hotel when I was working there are now adults and coming to Sisters as customers. In the 1990s, the number of men, women, and children who were homeless on any given day was increasing ever still. Although this decade represents a massive accumulation of wealth for many, the economic status of homeless people didn't improve. So nervous, my hands are shaking. The barriers preventing them from being able to successfully compete for jobs included a lack of computer skills, no address, no place to shower or wash clothes, a resume with whole years missing from the job market, past incarceration, sleep deprivation, and the loss of front teeth, to name a few. For us as a society, homelessness fell from grace. It became too large of a problem to solve when no silver bullet could be found. We wanted it simply to go away, and when it didn't, we pretended it didn't exist. In the 90s, people dealing with homelessness became invisible. By the end of this decade, though, a transformative discussion among homeless people began to take place. They were telling themselves and anyone else who would listen that they did not feel ashamed because they were poor. Homeless people began doing political and economic analysis of the society they were increasingly being left out of. In the first 5 years of this new millennium, the state of Oregon has faced one of its more dire economic downturns. What this has meant for homeless people is the loss of medical benefits, including life-saving prescriptions and housing. This prioritized budgeting has made them expendable. So not just uncared about, not just typecast, not just invisible, but expendable. Likely to be or meant to be sacrificed or destroyed. Even so, it is people dealing with homelessness and poverty who are determined to make ending homelessness a local and national priority, and who will strive to influence the shaping of public policies that address the systemic causes of poverty and are grounded in their daily experiences. One of Sister's customers told me years ago, and I'll end with this quote, "The biggest help is opportunity, education, and systems that are set up to teach self-reliance, not dependence. We don't want to be stuck in a lifetime of charity." Thank you.
Thank you. Before I was going to come here today, I had a meeting with the Downtown Retail Council, and I asked the 44 people present in the room to give me some of their perspectives that they'd like me to bring here today. And nobody spoke up. Nobody told me that they're unhappy or that there's a solution or there's some issue that they wanted me to share with you today. So the issues I share with you today are mainly my own and a little bit of some of the things that have gone on in the Downtown Retail Council meetings. I am personally affected by homelessness as a human being, and that I'll get to in a moment, but as a business person, I'm affected by it because I'm sometimes found with a bucket of hot water cleaning the vomit from my doorstep, the defecation from the sidewalk, or the people fornicating in my garbage cans. It's something that's not why I want to resolve it. I want to resolve it because it's a bigger human issue. Yes, I have the cost of doing business, of having to deal with this, and the Downtown Retail Council spends about $3,000 a year to work with the downtown community to keep it clean and safe. As a co-chair of the Downtown Retail Council, one of the issues that frequently comes up is panhandling. And there is a perception among some visitors to Portland, especially downtown, that it has become more and more aggressive. One point here is just because someone's panhandling doesn't mean they're homeless. So these two don't necessarily equal the other. But there are those suburbanites that get freaked out and have a perception that they are more threatened if they come downtown rather than stay in their nice little tidy suburb homes. This does affect the retail community. Again, it needs to be addressed because there's a human issue and we all need to figure out ways to put people to work so they can earn a living so that they can have a home. I spend most of my day trying to figure out how to keep over 70 people alive and keep my business going so that they have an income and a roof over their head. And I feel as a community member, I would work with the city to help us figure out how to put people to work so that they can take care of themselves. Coming here from New York, I've seen panhandling, I've seen homelessness, and it seems that many Oregonians are a little more offended by people who don't have a home and who have to ask for money. And it is a perception issue more than a real issue. They feel threatened because in their own minds they're not in their safe homes. And I feel that we need to work together to try to shift those perceptions and take it more from a position of how can we help them rather than how can we avoid the situation. A little story that somebody shared with me teaches about Ujima, which is one of the 7 principles of Kwanzaa. Ujima is a Kiswahili word that means to share the work of building the community. For a strong community, we must all be willing to make the other people's problems our own and to solve them together. Once there was a village in Nigeria, West Africa, where people made their living by farming. The village lay in a large green valley which was lined with palm trees and bushes. The villagers lived in houses made of dried mud, which the women decorated with colorful designs each year during the harvest festival. Surrounding the village were fields dotted with crops of yams, cassava, corn, and other vegetables. Just beyond the fields was a deep river that the villagers called Baba, which means father. The river was a friend and a provider for the people. The men used it for fishing, the women washed clothes on its banks, and the children played in its waters. But in the rainy season, it overflowed and the people were fearful of its power. They had built a strong dam which held back the water at a place where the river wound beyond the fields. There was a man in the village named Modupe, which means I am grateful. Modupe was a shy, quiet man whose wife had died and whose children were all married, so he had moved to the top of the mountain overlooking the valley and lived alone. There he built a small hut and cleared a small piece of land to grow his vegetables. The people did not see Modupe often, but they loved and respected him because he had the gift of healing the sick and because he was one of them. One year at harvest time, there were unusual heavy rains, but the crops had done so well there was much work to do that no one paid it any mind. Modupe stood by his house on the mountain one day and was looking out over the valley when he noticed that the river had become swollen from the rains and was straining the dam. The dam was straining so hard that by the time he could run down to the village to warn the people of the flood, it would be too late and all would be lost. Even as he watched, the wall of the dam began to break and water started to seep through. Modupe thought of his friends in the village. Their crops, their homes, and their very lives were in danger of being lost in the flood if he did not find a way to warn them. Then an idea came to him. He rushed to his small hut and he set it afire. When the people in the valley saw Modupe's burning house, they said, "Our friend is in trouble. Let's sound the alarm and go up to help him." Then, according to the custom, men, women, and children ran up to the mountain to see what they could do. When they reached the top of the hill, they did not have time to ask what had happened. A loud, crashing noise behind them made them turn around and look down into the valley. Their houses, their temple, and their crops were being destroyed by the river, which had broken the dam and was flooding the valley. The people began to cry and moan at their loss, but Modupe comforted them. "Don't worry," he said. "My crops are still here. We can share them while we build a new village." Then all the people began to sing and give thanks because they remembered that in coming to help a friend, they had saved themselves. Thank you.
Well, that was the perfect lead-in, I think. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I wish you could stand up here in my shoes because this is a really terrific crowd, and I'm going to end with you, which is where I'm starting, that I am personally very optimistic and impressed that this many people are taking your discretionary time to talk about homelessness, and I think that's a big key to what we have to figure out here. We're 1 year into this so-called 10-year plan to end homelessness, and in giving you both where we are, which I'm going to move towards, and some context to it, I want to move away a little bit, even though I thought it was kind of a fun title, from the deja vu sense that are we doing a plan again to solve homelessness? I think this community's efforts over the last, let's say, 25, 30 years on this issue are one of constantly trying to improve. And the plans are the places in which we take a second to look back and reflect and see what are we doing well, what could we be doing better. If you go back to Mayor Clark's plan that was discussed, the 12-point plan, at its time, it was very cutting edge. At its time, homelessness was very, very new in this community. As Gretchen talked about, in the 80s, we went from seeing a couple hundred people on streets like Portland's to a couple thousand. That trend was the same throughout the country, and there were multiple causes. In addition to the cuts that happened, you had an erosion of the housing stock that was never replaced. If you think about a lot of the places that people lived at the turn of the century, they were buildings that are now gone. Anywhere you look downtown, any place you see a courthouse, for example, like, remember that fight? It was likely to have been a place where low-income people lived. You had an explosion of crack cocaine in the 80s, which is sometimes not talked about, along with the deinstitutionalization, if I can say that, of the mentally ill and other issues. Mayor Clark's plan was trying to bring resources in place. At the end of the day, it was well thought out, but it focused primarily on shelters. And if you think a little bit about it, a shelter has very little to do with the reason you're homelessness. It's absolutely necessary, and we struggle right now, we'll struggle tonight to get everybody sheltered, and we will, but it does not solve the problems. They were also too big. In the 90s, Gretchen led an effort to try and figure out how could you be more of a human scale, and we broke up the mass shelters and we went to smaller shelters. We had, instead of 2 big shelters, 2 shelters for men, 1 for women, and 1 for the mentally ill, who are of course men and women, but it was a separate shelter for obvious reasons. That helped us to work with people. What we did about 2 years ago is decide to take another look, and Commissioner Serena Cruz is here from the county who joined me in this effort, and this is not a city plan, it's a community plan that was staffed by the county and city to pull it together. And we decided to go out and take a look, and I want to say very, very clearly, at the end of this, you're going to hear some remarkable progress. We are making progress on this issue this year in this community right now, and we're going to keep making progress and go forward. We're going to need your help. We could not have made progress in the short amount of time since we adopted this plan if we didn't have terrific people and institutions working on these issues. I almost hesitate ever to name names because then you forget somebody, there's so many. But from Sisters of the Road to the Salvation Army to Join, Central City Concern, Transition Projects, Portland Rescue Mission, Union Gospel Mission, places all of you support, they each have a niche along with the county mental health, the medical providers, and they all work very, very hard. What I want you to think about after saying that is something that appeared to me as we looked at this that should be logically impossible, which is somehow the sum of all those efforts is less than the parts. We have all these great efforts going on, but they're not tied together in a way that is getting people off of the streets. We went out and took a look, and some will argue the numbers. They may not be exactly right. The scale will be relatively close. Tonight in Portland, there will be about 4,000 people that are homeless. Perhaps 1,700 of those, perhaps a little less now because we've been working so hard at it, have been homeless for more than a year. As I move on, I'm going to refer to those people as chronically homeless people. You could pick a different date. You could say 2 years. You could say 6 months. I think at a year, you can say they've been homeless for a very, very long time. In the course of a year, I think 15,000 people will experience homelessness in this county. So if you think about that, most of the people who experience homelessness in Portland do not do so for a year. Not that even a month is acceptable, but about 2,000 people are basically permanently on the street and another 13,000 are cycling through. Our systems are not perfect for those 13,000 people. We could do a lot more, but they're not staying on the street. As we study the numbers, what we found, and this is my estimate, but I'll stand by it, we spend about $36 million a year on homelessness in Portland and Multnomah County. Whether you think that's too much money or too little money, I don't care. Maybe it should be a lot more. I don't think it's too much, but that's my own politics. About half of that money, $18 million, and when I get to that estimate, I'm estimating how much the emergency rooms spend on charity care. I'm estimating how much of the jail budget goes to housing homeless people for some period of time. But about half of that money, or $18 million, is serving the 2,000 people who are chronically homeless. So whether it's too much or too little, it is not working. And that 2,000 people is not just a human tragedy, and that's the main reason it interests me. It's disgraceful. It is also the source of the money we need to do better with our programs. Because if we're serving 13,000 people a year with 18 million and not getting 2,000 people off the street with the other 18 million, that's the place we start. At the end of the day, I agree 100%, nobody's going to be surprised by this with Gretchen's point of view, that we need a permanent source for affordable housing. We need a lot of things that involve money. My goal with this plan, and joined by Commissioner Cruz and a citizens commission of people that worked with us, chaired by Dan Steffi, was how can we make this system work better with the resources we have now? If I brought to you a plan and said to you, in this day and age, what I need is a whole bunch more money and I'll end homelessness, you would rightfully send us packing because there is no place to get a whole lot more money, and you would rightfully say you're spending a lot on it. What I want to show this community, and it's really, I'm just the spokesperson for hundreds of people who are working hard in the trenches and at the policy levels, in the bureaucracies where they're maligned, to try and take this on, is that we can do better, and that ought to spark finding where we put more money into it. But basically, you've got these 2,000 people that are out there on the street and are eating up a huge chunk of the resources. Again, problem not being solved. So we went and looked at it, and we came to some relatively simple but very strong conclusions. One, we need to focus on that population. Simple. We have not been doing that. We've been treating our efforts equally, which is a democratic thing to do, but not the cost-effective thing to do at the moment. We believe from experience, and this comes largely from Join, but others as well, who's a new group, that you can move people into housing much more quickly than we used to think in the Bud Clark days. And so one of the things we're working on is a thing called Housing First. And the idea is we connect through outreach workers and citizens with chronically homeless people and work to get them into a housing unit much, much more quickly, often directly from the street. And often, although I'm a huge supporter of public housing as well as nonprofit housing, we also have become much more aggressive in working with private landlords that are strictly for profit, have built relationships with them and said, if somebody will vouch for this person, can you take them in? The other thing we did is we came up with a pot of flexible money. Sometimes having a lot of money in the government world isn't as helpful as it can be if it's federal, because there's a lot of strings involved. So the council did something which I was actually very reluctant to do, and I'm usually a risk taker. We took $2 million in very flexible money and made it available for short-term rent assistance. The thesis that we were given that has turned out to be true is that there are quite a few people out there, even ones who've been on the street for a year or more, who, given about an 18-month window where they know their rent is going to be paid, can get into a situation where you no longer have to do it. I was scared to death because I was like, how do we start paying somebody's rent in a private apartment knowing it's going to run out in 18 months? We can't be the Section 8 program locally. It turned out this thesis was exactly right. It depends on human interaction. It depends on making sure that they have contact, and I'm going to get back to that. But it does work. You get people in and work with them. I like very, very simple explanations, and I'd ask you to think about it this way. Every single person who's on the street tonight should either be employed or is permanently disabled for some reason and cannot work. All of them fit into those two categories. Maybe they can't be employed for a while because they have a substance abuse problem or they have a treatable mental illness that they can get back to work. But at some point, either they can't work by definition because they're disabled, or they should be working. That's what we're trying to focus on, helping them figure out which of those they fall into. If you're disabled, it's not much, but you do qualify for $650 a month from the federal government. That then becomes the basis for trying to get you into permanent housing. We as a community, until the federal government gets its head up from wherever it is, we'll have to provide housing for people at $650 a month income. That's our burden. We can't, but there is that $650, and so that helps. If you're working, let's get you back on your feet. Let's get you working at Mothers, as Lisa talked about. Let's figure that out. That's doable. Using this approach, and I have a short amount of time. I'm well over my 5 minutes, but I'm going to bring it home fairly soon. We've had 500 chronically homeless people move off the street this year. 500. The goal the community set, that's in 9 months, was to get 170 people off the street this year, and I thought that might be too ambitious. And we've got on our websites and other places, I believe we have info here, lots of information on specific strategies and other pieces. But I actually think it's the attitude and the working together and the different approach. And I said I was going to end where I started, and that's what I want to work towards here. When I was presented the idea of working on a 10-year plan to end homelessness, I was close to walking away because I was not comfortable calling it a 10-year plan to end homelessness. Having worked in the field for 15 years, as Gretchen mentioned, I was not comfortable we could end homelessness in 10 years. I ran into two problems with that. The first was that the federal government, who's cutting the resources, still requires you to call it a plan to end homelessness to be eligible for federal grants. So you do with that what you want. So you can't get any federal grants unless you have a plan to end homelessness, despite the fact they're cutting the grants. Okay, so we'll call it that. The other reason was I was lying there in bed one night and I said to myself, how on God's green earth can this community aspire to anything less than ending homelessness? How can we, Portland, Oregon, have a plan that's designed to somewhat reduce homelessness sometime over the next 10 to 20 years, maybe do just a little bit better? We need to aspire to end homelessness, and I believe we can. I believe the city and county current version, which is really just Bud Clark's work updated for today, learning lessons, trying to do different pieces. It's Gretchen Kafoury's work, it's Bev Stein's work, it's all of the folks. It's the back when the business community had a little more organized effort on homelessness, which I'd like to see again someday, that's a plug too. It's all of their work. And it's coming together at this point, and the city and county cannot end homelessness in 10 years, but this community can certainly end chronic homelessness. And if we could get to the point, which I believe we can in 10 years, building housing, connecting with people, that you don't have people who've been on the street for more than a short period of time. I don't think anybody realistically thinks that 10 years from now, nobody will ever be without a home. But I don't see any reason as a community we cannot aspire and reach the goal that if you are without a home, it's only for a short period of time until you find your way back into the community. And that's what I want to give you for my final point. As part of thinking about this and researching it, we gave a small amount of money, the city did, to Sisters of the Road Cafe, and we had nothing to do with it other than that. They went out and did something called the Crossroads Project, and what it was, I believe, 400, about that much, interviews. It was 600 interviews, long oral interviews with people who'd been chronically homeless. And so it was hours and hours. I don't know if this has ever been done in the country, but a wonderful store of information. What those interviews showed is a couple of things, some which I think won't surprise you. One was that each person's story is unique. The other was that they do have some common themes. It's sort of like there's different things that cause you to be in these types of positions. Everybody's mix, like all of our mix, is unique. There was one common theme, however, that jumped out at me, and when I say it, I don't think it's going to surprise you, but I don't think our response so far addresses it, and I think it's absolutely critical, which is every one of these people felt absolutely alienated and isolated. They had lost their sense of being human because people no longer saw them as human. And I would submit to you that that is the issue that the community has to take on, and the city and county cannot. The government will never make homeless people feel human because we're the government. We don't make you feel human. But the community can. And what we have to do, and it's not as easy as me preaching that to you. You are not going to be able, if I get you fired up, to walk out of this door and find a homeless person and make them feel connected. We're going to have to build institutions and strategies to do that. I certainly do encourage you to say hi to folks, and it's very, very unusual that the aggressive panhandlers are the chronically homeless people. If you've been out stuck on the streets for years at a time, you probably aren't the one chronically doing the aggressive panhandling. But what we have to do is build systems like the nonprofits I described have done to bring people back. What is working on that housing first model? It's getting the person into housing, which is a community, and have that connected with the community to make sure they're okay. This is just a symbol. It's not going to do the job, but it's a first step. On January 17th, the county and the city are going to be hosting with a bunch of private groups something called Project Connect that's been modeled in San Francisco. For one day, we're going to take Memorial Coliseum, and we're going to invite all of the homeless people in Portland who want to come on down. We're going to have some basic services. We're going to have things like podiatry, because homeless people suffer a lot from poor foot problems. We're going to have an eye doctor there. But what we're really going to try and do is introduce the community and the homeless community to each other. And what I hope to build out of it, but I don't have the model, I need your help, is a way to start to connect neighborhood groups, churches. Maybe the model is each of our institutions connects and adopts one or two people in the sense of being their connection and talking to them. Maybe it's something different. But I believe that we have some housing models, some service models that are beginning to show some real results. The next thing we have to invent together is how does the community join in and do its part. And so for that, I thank you so much for your attention.
Susan's giving up her board chair position today. I had two quick questions that may be helpful before we move into the open mics. One is, Erik, could you very briefly address the common criticism that many have made about the plan, that the focus is on the chronic homeless people and not on families, and yet we know from the statistics that so many of the new homeless through the 1990s are families with children.
There's been a criticism that the plan focuses too much on chronically homeless people who tend to be singles. I mean, thankfully, most of the families are not homeless for a year. There is an element of the plan that is very much focused on families. So far, we've had about 101 families, is the number through September, moved off the street. So it isn't at the cost of that. The issue, though, is the money is being spent on the chronically homeless people, and I don't know where to find more money without freeing that money up. And so the pragmatic piece of the plan is to get more of those people out of the system and get that money then turned to families. If I had a big source for a bunch more money, I would put it to families. I would not put it to the chronic homeless individuals because of the need that's described. But I think sometimes on these plans, you get into a really, I think, reasonable debate between sort of pragmatics and idealism in terms of, I'd love to take a big chunk of that $18 million, but there's no way to kick the person out of the jail and transfer that money to the homeless families until we get rid of the need for those jail beds.
That leads to the other question that's probably on many people's minds, which is recently the city's biggest response has been the panhandling crackdown. Lisa addressed it, and I loved your parable, by the way. It was very important and appropriate. But it seems to some that the city's response is not to getting a dedicated fund for affordable housing or to helping families, but rather this crackdown on crime. And let other people answer it too, and Eric, I'm sure you have an answer for that. But let's just address the panhandling, because I suspect many people in the audience want to ask about that as well. Jenny, do you want to talk about it?
Well, I could say a couple things. One, I think it's interesting what happens when we create language, new language. We don't have an aggressive panhandling ordinance in Portland. In fact, in Portland, panhandling is not against the law. When we put the question to our downtown region's Deputy District Attorney, Lori Abraham, to concretely tell people what are we talking about when we say aggressive panhandling? And we have laws on the books now that if a person is engaged in that behavior, it's inappropriate and it's against the law. And it is not called aggressive panhandling. It's things like, now I'm not going to know the exact laws, but I know the kinds of behaviors. It's like if I was walking down the street and somebody came up to me and grabbed my arm, or if somebody came up to me and asked me for money, and if I wasn't able to give that to them or chose not to, and I started walking away and they started tracking me, right? That's what we mean by that expression, aggressive panhandling, I believe. But I think the language is hurtful a lot of the time. Having said that, I talk to businesses all of the time. There are a number of you in the audience who are businesses that have supported Sisters for years, and ask that question about what do you think is impacting business in the downtown? Do you believe what the media tells us and that it's this aggressive panhandling? Most of the time when people respond back to me, they say, you know, Jenny, it's easier to get to a major mall than get to downtown, and so people go to the major malls. And for a long time, parking was a huge problem, and business owners would say that to me, that it's parking that's the problem. I think that when in the research that Erik spoke to, that Sisters has been involved in, and if I can make a plug for it, we just met with the University of Washington Tacoma, who is doing the outside analysis for us on that, and they're going to be publishing some articles in journals here within the next 3 months. So anybody who's on our newsletter, you'll know that. So if you're not on our newsletter, sign up. But the point I want to make is that from our research, we found that and I fully expected that a lot of people would say, because we asked the question of folks, how do you make ends meet? I mean, we all know that food stamps don't make you through the month as far as getting food pieces, and you can't buy hygiene items with food stamps. You can't get toilet paper, you can't get toothpaste, you know what I'm saying? And so the majority of people who said they panhandled for additional income in order to make make ends meet said that they used them for hygiene items, for cigarettes, and for food. And so I think that there's a myth out there also, and I think it gets revved up, if you will, by the media. And so I think some of the responsibility, and I'm not sure how to do this, but this is a community, talk about being allies with one another at the city-county level, at private business level, and at the homeless themselves, and folks like myself and other service organizations, is how do we help create language that doesn't hype a problem and spin it, but actually addresses it. Once upon a time, I'm old enough to remember op-eds in the Oregonian and the Oregon Journal that actually gave you two sides to a story. And I just don't think we get that anymore. And I think that it's in that dialogue, talking about self-interest from whatever perspective you're coming from, but putting that discussion on the table and having all the parties there. I think we're creative enough in the city to come up with solutions to it.
Lisa, do you want to respond, and then Eric, and then we'll go to questions.
I was at a meeting where Mayor Potter read a letter from a visitor to the city which expressed their unhappiness with the fact that somebody had accosted them for money, and then they told them no, and they pursued them and made them feel uncomfortable. I mean, it's a letter somebody wrote to the mayor. As I said, some of this is perception, and absolutely, Jenny, media can take all sorts of spins and make us believe all sorts of things. And I just feel that there needs to be a way to shift our paradigms, a way to come up with solutions that are outside of the box by providing work and providing jobs to people who are trying to get shelter for themselves. It takes them off the street because they are earning money to live. And I know that finding jobs sounds like so cliche, but it really is how I spend most of my day. And I just feel that if we work as a community to figure this out, I mean, for example, I know that the Portland Business Alliance does employ people who have formerly been homeless in at least for 6 months to help work and clean up the streets and sweep the sidewalks. They have found some jobs for people who have been homeless. And if we all work together and try to figure this out, by offering these people jobs, they aren't on the streets to be aggressively asking for money. And let's get rid of that aggressive word. I got it. Yeah. But anyway, so I just think that we all have to figure this out and do our share.
Eric, did you want to close that?
Couple quick thoughts. I think, to be blunt, that these are separate discussions that get related by political interests. I mean, I think there's a political interest in certain issues downtown, and there's sort of equating drug dealing with homelessness. I mean, I 100% support the police cracking down on both low and high level drug dealing downtown. I think it causes a big problem for our retail. I think that's primarily the drug trade is what's driving the aggressive panhandling. I don't think too many of the chronically homeless people that I'm talking about are involved in that. And I think they can be separated. And I think people very clearly try not to separate it for a variety of political reasons, and I think that's really important. On that note, I think that if those are the issues, then broad sweeping, sound good kind of things like we're going to ban sitting downtown are silly. Banning sitting downtown, which has been one of the arguments from the Business Alliance, is not going to do anything to stop drug dealing. They'll stand up. So I don't support those kind of things, but I do support targeted enforcement of the laws, and I actually think that if we enforce the laws well downtown, it's to the homeless communities benefit because they'll stop being falsely accused of doing that stuff. I would also say one small thing in the 10-year plan that's a big victory because it was not agreed to for a long time by the downtown community is that we've called for a downtown day center. And one of the problems we do have right now that's very serious is there's no place during the day, for very few places at least, that are open for homeless people. So the shelters, you have to leave them in the morning. And so I think we finally got a great moment where business and the social service community have realized that it's actually in business's interest to open up some day places so that people who aren't dealing drugs and who are just homeless have somewhere to go during the day. And I think that's something we could get done relatively quickly that would also help sort these issues into their proper camps.
We'll now open the program to questions from the floor. Questions are a privilege for City Club members, and we'd appreciate them being short and with a question mark at the end. Tom?
Tom Cox, City Club member. Thank you all for doing this. I've heard a number of words and phrases from everybody who spoke, and it really speaks to the assumptions we've all got. I heard Gretchen repeatedly say we need dedicated funding for affordable housing. And what I heard from Genevieve was we need respect and we need to treat people like they're fellow human beings and not some separate caste or separate race of human beings. The only thing I've seen that is hopeful, and Erik, I wanted this program to happen because, like you, I thought this 10-year plan to end homelessness was a canard. It was some sort of, oh yeah, the sheer force of good desire and good intention was going to sweep away all human history. And that upset me. I'm glad to know you're not thinking that. The only thing I've seen or heard that's going to change this is something called timedollar.org that respects the homeless. Are we doing anything with the timedollar.org people on the East Coast? Are we doing anything to systematically use the resources that the homeless people themselves represent? Because if we're not, I don't think it's going to work.
Time Dollar is a kind of barter program. And I know that Join in particular took a look at that model, but Join also took a look at Sisters barter program that we've had in place for 26 years now. I would just say a couple of things. One, for people who are poor and working class, barter is a way of getting your needs met and has been historically. It wasn't a new concept for me when I helped start Sisters in 1979. I learned it at Burnside Projects when they were running a hotel, and you could pay for your rent by doing jobs in the hotel, like the laundry, for instance. Barter is a huge part of how people are able to pay for their meals in the cafe. Almost half of our customers don't have the $1.25 for the meal and aren't walking in the door with a meal coupon. So they exchange their labor based on $6 an hour. If you work for 15 minutes in Sisters, it is worth the $1.25 meal plus the 25-cent beverage. So like I said, almost half of our customers do that. Barter comes up in our study all of the time as a way that people dealing with homelessness said, if a barter arrangement was in place in the social service agencies that I need to go through, I would go in and out of those with a great deal more dignity. So it's one of the policy pieces that we will, Sisters and Crossroads will talk about a lot.
I would say it's really, what you're getting at, Tom, is at the heart of what I was trying to say, in the sense that you need to get people into a relationship with folks, into a dignified place to live, and then they can help work with you to find what it is that's going to work for them. One of the things we've seen very regularly, which shouldn't surprise you, but it sounds surprising, is that people who've been homeless a long, long time, shortly after getting stabilized, tend to want to volunteer. You know, they want to go and help. And so I think that is actually at the heart of it, that you do need services. You need drug treatment. You need things that people need to break some of the demons that they're fighting. But ultimately, they need to be people. And that's at the heart of it.
Thank you.
I'd also say just really quickly that people who are dealing with homelessness want to be responsible and be held accountable. And so many of our social service systems don't give them that opportunity.
Andy Robeson, club member. Gretchen, you praised this panel, and praiseworthy indeed they are, but I don't know about the diversity. I would say it's maybe all the way from A to C, and perhaps one of the 600 people that Jenny had interviewed might have been a good addition to the panel. That having been said, a question for Erik. Erik, the traditional wisdom has been that to prepare people for getting off homelessness, there was a need to stabilize those who were chronically addicted or chronically mentally ill before they went into permanent housing. And the Housing First strategy is certainly a departure from that. It would appear to me that in any plan such as this, 2,000 and maybe dealing with the first few hundred, that there would be an almost necessary need to cream at first. Those who are most ready to take advantage get served first, and that's probably as it should be. But my guess is that it goes further and further into the pool that they get harder and harder people to serve. Has this been recognized? Is there any ongoing evaluation of the first few hundred? And if I'm correct, that it'll be even the last few hundred will be extremely harder. Is that taken into consideration?
It's a great question, Andy, and I want to, as part of answering, thank Heather Lyons and her team from Housing Community Development, as well as the team from the county that are working on these issues, because we actually are taking that question very seriously. We don't know the answer. To the extent that you can cream chronically homeless people, we probably have. I mean, it's in the sense that the first couple hundred that are going to come in off the street probably, I think the most difficult situations, and I'm not the frontline expert, there's a bunch of them in the room, tend to be people who have really severe mental illness that you just can't have that conversation with. What I believe the experts believe is that you can get there over time, but what you've got to do is you've got to have somebody who has a relationship, so at the moment that you can make that connection, somebody's there. And and the same is also true for people suffering from drug and alcohol addiction. And part of the problem we've got right now is that the waiting lists at the treatment programs are so long that when you get that moment of clarity that you want to come clean, you got to hold it for 4 or 5 months. And that's asking a lot if anybody in this room's ever dealt with an addiction, which I suspect a lot of us have. And so those are going to be issues. Part of what I was getting at is, can we show this model works? Then as we begin to move forward on it, be honest about the barriers to getting to the end of the race and bring those back to the community and try and solve them.
Thank you.
Gilly Burlingham, City Club and Homeless Working Group member. I want to thank all of you for the work you're doing. Homelessness has been driving me crazy for years. And when I came out here, I was told by my wonderful daughter that there's such a thing as Sisters of the Road tickets that you can give to people. Somehow I don't seem to be approached by panhandlers enough, even though I stand around downtown. Is there something wrong with me? Yeah. So I'm now aggressively approaching homeless people. And I've made some pretty darn good friends that way. Can I just say that I am driven equally crazy by the people who pay $100 to go see Les Miserables, and they weep over these poor people who are suffering in Paris, and that horrible Jean Valjean who's chasing them. And then they come out and, ooh, get away from me, you person sleeping on the grate. My question is there any way that we can put pressure points on the federal government to please put more money into affordable housing and homelessness? Do you have any ideas for us ordinary citizens?
Well, one might say it's hard to maintain my position after the last couple of elections. I think, you either move forward or fall back every election, and so we need to really keep putting housing onto the plate of our elected officials. And may surprise you to hear me say this, Senator Smith has been very, very good on affordable housing in the Multnomah County, because he's heard from Multnomah County voters that it matters to them, and he has a good conscience. And frankly, Multnomah County matters a lot to Senator Smith if you look at the electoral math. And so I think, I don't know that my I'm real optimistic about this room's ability to impact the crew from Crawford, Texas, but I think that we can impact our delegation, and I think there's still, even in this bad budget, opportunities to find ways to help, particularly if you have a good story to tell, which I think we do, and so we need to work to let our delegation know that you care about these issues.
The other thing I would add is that there is a West Coast regional effort that is beginning to emerge that Sisters was invited to be a part of, and Crossroads from Portland. And this is an effort that is coming from people dealing with homelessness and the folks who are housed, who are their allies. And the whole point is to get the message in a regional way to Washington, D.C., that homelessness is solvable and it needs to be the top priority. And I think that you're going to see where homeless people themselves take their agenda, because if you ask a homeless person, unlike a lot of us, they will tell you homelessness is solvable and why haven't we done it.
Our speakers have agreed to stay a little bit longer, so I think we can go to 1:30 if there's for more questions. And thank you for doing so.
Steve Novak, City Council. I'd like to know if the panel